There is a child somewhere in the world right now having a complete breakdown over nothing. Wrong cup, wrong snack, wrong shoes, wrong everything. And every parent watching this knows exactly the feeling. The quiet, building, bone-deep exhaustion of dealing with a child who has decided that today, for reasons known only to them, the entire world is wrong. But here's what nobody tells you about that moment. It's ancient. Not metaphorically ancient, literally ancient. The difficult child, the stubborn one, the screaming one, the one who won't eat what you put in front of them and won't sleep when you need them to, that child has been the single greatest daily challenge of human life for at least 300,000 years. And how your ancestors handled it is not what you'd expect. Modern parenting is an industry. Books, podcasts, sleep consultants, behavioral therapists, school counselors. If your child is difficult, there are entire professional ecosystems built to help you cope. Your ancestors had none of that. They had fire. They had a tribe. They had the constant ambient pressure of a landscape that was actively trying to kill everyone in it. And inside that world, they had children who were just as stubborn, just as emotional, just as irrational as children are today. Because here's the thing about child behavior, it hasn't changed. Let's start with what archaeology and anthropology have actually found. For most of human prehistory, children were not raised by two parents. They were raised by a village. Anthropologists call this cooperative breeding, the idea that in early human societies, child rearing was a collective activity distributed across multiple adults. Grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, unrelated adults in the same band, all of them participated in raising children who weren't biologically theirs. This is actually unusual in the animal kingdom. Most primate species practice exclusive maternal care. The mother raises the offspring, mostly alone. Humans do something different. Researcher Hrdy spent decades studying this. Her conclusion was stark. Human children would not have survived infancy without cooperative breeding. We are the only great ape whose offspring require multiple caregivers to survive. The human infant is uniquely helpless, uniquely dependent for an unusually long period of time, and here's where it gets interesting. Multiple studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, Kung San of the Kalahari, the Hadza of Tanzania, the Ache of Paraguay, have found a surprisingly consistent pattern in how adults respond to difficult child behavior. They don't punish it. Not in the way we think of punishment. Physical discipline in traditional hunter-gatherer groups is extraordinarily rare. Anthropologist David Lancy, who spent his career documenting child-rearing practices across cultures, found that in most forager societies, adults view direct correction of child behavior as largely ineffective and socially disruptive. You don't tell a child what to do. You model. You wait. You let consequences arrive naturally. A child who won't share food eventually goes hungry. A child who refuses to cooperate gets excluded from the group's activity. A child who throws a tantrum is often simply ignored until the energy runs out. The Hadza have a phrase that researchers transliterate roughly as "they will learn." It's used to explain almost every instance of difficult child behavior. The child took something that wasn't theirs. They will learn. The child refused to help. They will learn. The child is screaming at the edge of camp. They will learn. Patience, in other words, was not a parenting philosophy, it was a survival strategy. But there was a darker side. Cooperative breeding is only possible inside a functioning group, and the group's first obligation was to the group, not to any individual child. Archaeological evidence and anthropological records from multiple continents suggest that in early human societies, children who were perceived as unable to contribute to group survival, due to severe disability, persistent illness, or resource scarcity, were sometimes abandoned. This is one of the most uncomfortable findings in human evolutionary history, and it's one that most popular accounts of prehistoric life quietly skip past. It wasn't cruelty in the modern sense. It was calculation. A group moving across a landscape had a carrying capacity. An infant who could not be carried and would alert predators with its crying was a liability the group could not afford. An older child who consumed resources but could not yet provide them was a strain during periods of scarcity. What this tells us is something important about the emotional architecture of ancient parenting. Love for a child, in the early human context, was not unconditional in the way modern Western culture has framed it. It was conditional on survival. It was conditional on group capacity. It was love inside a set of constraints that most of us today will never face. And the difficult child, the one who was loud, stubborn, high energy, defiant, was in some contexts a liability. Here's the thing about difficult children. In the right environment, those traits aren't problems, they're advantages. The child who refuses to accept the answer because I said so. The child who pushes back, asks why, won't comply with arbitrary authority. In a modern classroom, that child gets a behavioral report. In a hunter-gatherer band, that child might be the one who survives the encounter with a new predator because they didn't follow the group into danger. Anthropologists studying temperament in traditional societies have found that the traits we associate with difficult children, high reactivity, emotional intensity, persistence, resistance to authority, map closely onto traits associated with innovation, risk-taking, and leadership in adult hunter-gatherers. The difficult child in the ancestral environment was not a problem to be solved, they were a type. A recognizable, recurring human type that every group had and every group needed. And the group knew it. Which is why the response to difficult behavior was patience, not suppression. You didn't break the difficult child. You waited for them to grow into what they were. So go back to that child having a breakdown over the wrong cup. Their brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do 300,000 years ago. It is testing limits. It is asserting individual will against collective authority. It is doing the ancient, necessary, exhausting work of becoming a person. Your ancestors sat in firelight and watched the same thing happen. And they didn't have sleep consultants. They didn't have behavioral frameworks. They had each other, they had patience, and they had a phrase that meant something like, they will learn. Maybe that's still the most honest thing anyone has ever said about raising a difficult child. They will learn.